Hello and welcome to another episode of the MacCast. I can't believe I'm doing episode 2. So today's episode is going to basically be a lot more focused. I'm going to start off talking about the main topic, which is Dua Lipa in danger? Is the third album curse coming for Dua? And then I'll open up the floor to different sections and stuff that I will do each episode. After looking at some of your feedback and coming up with my own ideas, I think that I'm going to structure the podcast in a way where I talk about the music that I love. That's going to be the heart of it. And then I'll also talk about TV things that I've watched, and most definitely I'll also talk about movies because I write movies. That is what I intend to do beyond this channel with my life. And I saw Madam Web this week and I'm going to talk about it. So sit back and relax. There are timestamps as always if you have specific sections that you want to listen to. So the first topic of discussion is something that I was planning on making a video about, but I decided to just have the podcast talk about it, and that is Dua Lipa's upcoming third era. Future Nostalgia was such a powerful record. I really do see a lot of people compare it to the 2020s version of Teenage Dream. Not necessarily in the quantity of number ones, but in terms of having a long and proper pop era, which would have never happened if the pandemic never happened. Just to recap, Future Nostalgia started all the way in November of 2019 with Don't Start Now, and it continued way into 2022 when Dua had been essentially touring the album. I also do count Dance the Night and Barbie as part of Future Nostalgia just in terms of sound and aesthetic. Dua was really creative in that era. She was doing these shows virtually through the pandemic. Future Nostalgia was an event in that it really did resemble a traditional pop girl era. It had a remix album. It had a reissue with new tracks. Dua really did try to squeeze every single drop she could out of the era, and that was refreshing for its time. Future Nostalgia was such a hit that it ended up winning Best Pop Vocal Album. She had really improved her craft, both as a singer and a dancer and a performer. The improvement, because everybody had clowned her before for the One Kiss performance. Future Nostalgia was important for her. It was a Cinderella moment. It was the moment where she proved that her first era wasn't a fluke, that she was here to stay. But in a way, for many people who weren't really in the know, even if New Rules was a big hit, for some people this was their first proper Dua era that they were following. So this upcoming third album has been kind of fun to watch because the question was, is Dua Lipa really here to stay? And 2024 has been a year where she has finally kind of debuted in a movie, Argyle, which I liked but bombed, and these two singles, Houdini and Training Day, have not been doing hot in the States. In the UK, they've been doing relatively well because that is her domestic market at the end of the day, but in the States, Houdini has only peaked at 11. It hasn't even cracked the top 10, which is a place that Dua has kind of found comfort in. The follow-up single, Training Day, which was introduced at the Grammys. Training Day isn't really performing to standards. In the UK, it debuted at 4, which is pretty decent. It had to compete with Beyonce's Texas Hold'em Up, which is number 1 around the world everywhere, so I'll give a leeway to that. But in the States, it didn't even crack the top 20. I think it peaked at 27 so far, which, again, Dua's game has never really been big debuts, per se. It's always been a longevity game with her. Houdini is still holding on in the charts, slowly climbing up. But there's very much a clear disconnect between her and the general public this era that I do want to bring light to. I think a lot of it has to do with the aesthetic choices as well as the sound of this era. I'm just going to briefly talk about Training Day because I do think that this should have been the lead single. I do think that it's a more palatable sound compared to what we got with Houdini. Training Season's themes and its sound really hew closer to the Dua that we are familiar with. The song seems to be about her need to be with a partner who really understands and gets her. Training Season is over because she doesn't want to tell this guy what to do. He needs to know how to love her. And in a way, it's a double entendre because she's saying Training Season for herself is over. She's done dating without intent or purpose. And I do like that message. I think that it's a unique, cool, mature sound. There's also apparently this unsubstantiated rumor, I'm not sure if it's true or not. The Sun reported that she had recorded a very expensive music video implying that this was supposed to be the lead. She had to pull it due to the ongoing crisis in Gaza, but it would have featured some scenes of chaos and explosions, which would have been seen as insensitive. If that's the case, that kind of explains why Houdini as a lead just wasn't really strong. I think the general public's response to it was not necessarily derisive, but just utter kind of indifference to a degree. Part of why Houdini, in my opinion, just didn't work was there wasn't a real narrative to that song. I mean, that song was essentially about ghosting and being Houdini, like disappearing. There really wasn't any depth or a storyline to kind of follow, and I feel like a lot of people do want songs to have a beginning, middle, and end. I feel like that's why some of our pop peers do succeed on that front. I'm not saying that all dance music has to be deep or meaningful, but Houdini just really didn't have a specific meaning or story that matched what people wanted out of their music. Dua's music tends to have narrative. Don't Start Now it's this powerful song about moving on from an ex and committing to yourself and being independent. Levitating is a song about finding someone who really just causes you to feel like you're flying up in the sky. Break My Heart is a classic story of coulda, shoulda, woulda. It's this internal monologue of whether or not this new person is going to break her heart or not. That's fascinating. There's a narrative. There's a story to be told there. Houdini doesn't really have a story. It's like, I come and I go. I'll disappear like Houdini. You know, like, again, I'm not asking for rocket science. I'm just saying, like, songs have to have a relatable story or narrative, and I don't feel like Houdini had one. Training Day, on the other hand, does have a story that you can kind of latch on to. It can be a song about purposeful dating. It can be a song about self-empowerment. Like, people can actually attach meaning and find a story in it, and I do think it is a better single choice in that regard. She said that it's inspired by a couple of bad dates, and while it does sort of retread some familiar ground, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. I feel like the structuring of the chorus and the pre-chorus is pretty fascinating. I feel like there is a nice contrast between how the song sounds. I personally am enjoying the new production by Danny L. Harrell and Kevin Parker. I think they're knocking it out of the park in terms of delivering some more advanced club sounding beats. I always felt like Future Nostalgia never really went that hard into the dance category, like it always played it safe. But I do think that the production itself might be an issue as to why people aren't connecting or clicking with it. These songs are really meant to be listened to in a club. They will not make sense to you as like a workout playlist or like a date playlist thing. I feel like that's partially why the general public has not really been into this sort of era so far. That's not to say that it's bad. I think critically and also from my own perspective, I really am digging her new sound. It's just I feel like it's not clicking with, you know, Mary Louise Parker who drives her kids to school, or the TikTok girlies looking for a new dance trend to follow. Future Nostalgia had this sort of universality to it that really did click across different demographics. Which brings me to my next point, and this is going to sound a bit controversial, but you know, most of you guys who watch me are part of the queer community. Maybe she's pandering too much towards the queer community. I think it is possible to go way in too deep with the gays, and you know, chasing after the approval of a niche group of gays on Twitter is not going to lead you to success. That's all I'm saying. But then again, the intentions of this album might not necessarily be to match Future Nostalgia's success, but rather just make a successful dance pop record. I do feel like this era is veering pretty close to Confessions on a Dance Floor. The visual comparisons in the Houdini video to Hung Up are not lost on me. I feel like this is a record for the hardcore fans, for the... What is Dua Lipa's fandom name? Someone answer me that in the comments, because I've seen so many different conflicting answers. On an artistic level, I do think Dua Lipa 3 is not in trouble. I think that it's going to be a cohesive, interesting, fun record with cool production moments. Thematically, I do think it's still probably going to veer close to what she usually sings about. I don't necessarily think that she's in trouble with critics and her specific intended audience, but I do believe from a general public standpoint that this album is shaping up to kind of be a commercial disappointment, which is a factor that you always have to think about when we're talking about pop stars. To be a pop star, you need to be popular. I see so many frustrated comments from people who are fans of artists that I gently criticize, honestly, for their lack of chart success. Cough Cough Ava Max, who also recently had an era with red hair that underperformed with the general public. I'm not doing these comments to drag these artists. I actually enjoyed Diamonds and Dance Floors, and I also am enjoying Dua's album so far. But I am looking from the perspective of someone who analyzes chart data, as someone who is an enthusiast for the Hot 100. I understand that charts aren't everything, but they are important because they kind of dictate a direction that an artist goes to. I feel like artists do care about their commercial success. They care about their Grammy prospects. They have a meta sense of the direction that they want their careers to go in, and how we reward that movement, how it's rewarded through chart success, how it's rewarded through Grammys, that influences the trajectory of a artist's career. It is an undeniable facet that in order to be a successful pop star, you need to be popular. I'm sorry. Sometimes you hear a third album curse is at play. This will usually happen to an artist whose second album is actually bigger than the first, causing different expectations to be levied upon. I think the most recent example of a quote-unquote third album curse was Solar Power by Lorde, which I've seen get a lot of flowers from younger listeners nowadays, now that people separated it from its original release date, which so happened to be in the middle of the pandemic, like squarely in the middle of it. Another notorious victim of the third album curse is a beloved record to me, Art Pop, which commercially tanked, but still found a following somehow afterwards. I think maybe the third album curse isn't necessarily tied to the music so much as the public perception of the artist, but with someone like Dua Lipa, who doesn't really have much of a public presence to begin with, she is someone who will live and die by how good her music is. It was something that also happened to Katy Perry, who her third album, Prism, did relatively well, but didn't really set the cards up correctly for Witness to happen the way that it was supposed to. So time will tell whether or not the third album curse, or whatever variant of a curse you imagine, will get Dua Lipa. I think that the music's going to be good, but commercially right now it's just not looking good, and I'm going to be tracking this. Like, this isn't a story I'm going to drop. Sound off in the comments below, fight me if you need to, but it's just not looking good at the moment. Personally speaking, I'd be more than happy to be wrong, by the way. My next segment isn't really a segment yet, so much as just me putting the idea out there, but I will be doing vintage album discussions on the podcast. These are going to be albums that I just don't have the time to do a proper, like, full-on era video for, but discussions that I do want to be led by you guys, actually. I want this to be a more interactive segment. So each week of the podcast, I'm going to check the comments and pick an album for everybody to kind of listen to before the next episode. So think of it like a book club, but with albums. These are going to be any albums that were made before 2010 that I have never made a video for, or just don't have the time to make videos for. I'm already picking the first episode for next week, but next week, stay tuned. I will be discussing The Duchess by Fergie. It's not going to be an entire era recap. I'm just going to touch on songs that really affected me personally, the singles, obviously, and kind of like why this album has persisted through time. After that episode, you guys can kind of like pick. I will look through the comments on the first day or the second day of the podcast and set up a poll in community if I feel like I just can't pick between one or the other. And I will announce each week which one I will be covering for the following week. So definitely stay tuned, because I do want these podcasts to be a two-way conversation, and as time comes, I actually will invite people to pre-record an interview segment with me about an album or why they picked it or why they liked it. Maybe one of you will be a guest on this podcast because of this segment. So yes, the vintage album discussions are a thing I will be doing. So sound off below with your choices for records that you want me to listen to or revisit. The next section is kind of new to me. I was not planning on covering this on my podcast, but it just recently came out, and it is the Netflix live action version of Avatar: The Last Airbender, a show that really has become a comfort show for so many younger folks because of the pandemic, but it was something that I was watching as it was airing. I don't care if you guys call me old. I think I was maybe 8 or so when these episodes were dropping, and I watched it religiously. I loved Avatar: The Last Airbender as an Asian American. It was one of my few sort of shows that reflected my culture, but not necessarily accurately, but it was something. The world building, the characters, the jokes, the tone, the heart of the series, the action. It's a timeless show, and the live action adaptation of it that happened before in 2010 by M. Night was an atrocity, but it also spoke to how unadaptable this sort of thing is. But then Netflix, with its unlimited piles of money, yet somehow every show still manages to look cheap self, decided, hey, why not make this a live action series? I believe the original creators of the show had been involved at some point, but essentially dropped out, because essentially they do want to make this the kids' version of Game of Thrones. I felt like this adaptation of it really reconfigured the show to be much more dour and less humorous than the original is, which I guess is an adaptational liberty you can take, but it's something that just has me shocked as to how this thing began, how this thing was made. I think that the biggest crime of this remake is that it's just mid. It's not terrible, it's not the worst thing that's ever been shot. It truly isn't completely egregious, in my honest opinion. There are major flaws that I'm going to talk about for the next 10-ish minutes, but still, it's mid, and I think that in itself is a crime. It could genuinely be a better show than it is, but it is not, and I'm about to go into it. The pilot has to be one of the worst pilots that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the show opens in a completely brand new way to be all like, haha, this is like a new version of it. It takes place in a chronological order, which takes away the mystery. I felt like one of the parts that I loved the most about book one was you were really with Aang in discovering how the world had changed. Aang was the surrogate character because he disappeared for 100 years. You were in Aang's shoes because you've never been a part of this world. Instead, we are given exposition scenes over and over again, basically reiterating that Aang is the chosen one, over and over again, to the point where Gran, a character who, that's Katara's grandma, she gives the monologue speech that opens each episode in the cartoon show. And we have to essentially watch the Air Temple be genocided, which in modern times, with the context of the world around us, is something that we never really needed to see in live action. We never saw it in the show. In fact, it was implied in the show with Gyatso's skeleton. The fact that we didn't see it is what made it horrifying. Instead, every 5 minutes of the show, someone is being burned alive by Fire Lord Ozai, who is no longer a shadowy character, but instead is shown to us as Daniel Dae Kim, aka Dr. Han from The Good Doctor. I mean, yes, he's hot, but we literally, the mystery of Ozai, not seeing him, having him be the shadowy figure in the earlier books, only to learn who he is towards the end. Again, it's just the storytelling. It really isn't there. This is a show that is explicitly made for people who have already seen the original Avatar series. If you have not watched the cartoon and you are just jumping into this as a new viewer or a curious person, this show does not handhold you through the process. a lot of the rich thematic material, a lot of the things that you're supposed to get. You won't get any of that because this show assumes that you've seen the original and you are interested in watching a ugly live action remake. Live action remakes of animated material have never worked for me. I think the closest that it's ever worked for me was the recent Little Mermaid film, which I mainly enjoyed because of Halle Bailey's vocals. But again, Disney live action stuff has sucked. And this is just further proof. And Cowboy Bebop, I will not go into details at how upset I am with that remake, especially considering the caliber of John Cho's casting. But back to the pilot. So the pilot just tries to tell the story in chronological order, removing the mystery and the wonder of the universe, and also Aang himself is not really like Aang in the cartoon. Aang in the cartoon is this funny, lost 12-year-old boy who is thrust into this world and forced to pick up the pieces of it and kind of retain his like charm and wit. Here he is portrayed as a bending prodigy who is cursed to be the Avatar, which is an element that was present in the original, but he's humorless. Actually, most of these characters are humorless. The only person who is still jokey is Sokka, and we're going to talk about Sokka. Sokka in live action very much resembles Sokka in the Ember Island Players episode. For those of you who have not watched Avatar, there is an episode in the third season, called the Ember Island Players, in which they watch a extremely poorly choreographed and acted inaccurate play of themselves. It's essentially kind of like a recap episode, but told through a jokey lens. This show is kind of like Ember Island Players, or at least the pilot felt like Ember Island Players. Ian Osley, I do not know how to pronounce his last name. I'm not going to figure out how to pronounce it. He does not resemble Sokka at all. There have been fans who have questioned whether or not he's actually a native actor. Some have even dug up proof that he bought his way into being listed as native. I'm not going to touch that with a stick. I'm not going to go into that. I think he's just a poor casting choice. He doesn't have any chemistry with the actress who plays Katara, who honestly does a pretty good job with the role. I felt like she was a little bit stiff, but quite frankly, it's just because she's a young actress, possibly. I will say, though, that Dallas Liu, who plays Zuko, he is quite possibly the best casted actor for that role. I felt like he was really emulating the physical gestures of the character. He's someone who did his homework. I mean, even the way that he pronounces things, it really resembles Dante Basco's performance, the original voice actor's performance. The other well-casted actor is Gordon Cormier, who I think is going to grow to become a wonderful Aang. I think he has the energy and the commitment to the role. I thought that he did the best with the material he was given. Again, I'm not going to be too harsh on the actors. I think most of them are young and they're starting out, but Sokka was just really poorly cast. I mean, his dynamic with Katara, them not even having any tender moments throughout the series that were believable. I mean, I think they spent most of it bickering at each other, which, you know, was part of the original show, but I just don't get the sense that they have that sibling bond. I didn't buy that, and I feel like Sokka and Katara's sibling bond is one of the heart tenets of the show. You know, it's one of the key points of the show that I personally, like, it resonated with me. As an older brother with a younger sister, or younger siblings, I always felt a kinship to Sokka's character, him being this goofy guy who eventually grows up to become a serious strategic planner, which, again, you know, the other thing about Sokka that I don't like is the whole, like, hubbub over removing his sexism arc. Sokka is supposed to be sexist. That whole sequence in Kyoshi Island. The Kyoshi Island episode in particular kind of miffed me in the sense that Sokka was supposed to cross-dress as a Kyoshi warrior for a moment of empathy, and they removed that, and it's not even meant to be a joke in the original series. I mean, there's some jokey elements to it, but it's supposed to remind him and ground him that, like, he doesn't know everything, that there's different perspectives around him, there's different people who have grown from him. Like, he is this character who, much like Katara herself, like, both of those characters are big fish in a small pond at the beginning in the southern water tribe, but then as they go out into the world, they find themselves and they meet other people and they learn different skills. I felt like that really wasn't reflected. But again, this is season 1, but it's also just odd. The actress who plays Suki, again, really well casted. But the costumes, my friend who is really into costuming had some gripes about the material looking cheap because they seem to be patterns printed on polyester. There's like a very on and off quality about this show. I felt like some of it did genuinely look pretty close to what it was supposed to look like, but other parts of it looked AI. Some of the animations for the bending did not look good. King Boomy in particular, that whole episode and how they portrayed him. The actor is great, don't get me wrong. I actually have seen a few things that he's in, but the way that Boomy was portrayed looked really cheap and bad. And the framing of the show is something that, like, I didn't realize until I saw someone post it on Twitter, and a friend of mine who is a cinematographer himself brought it up to me. This show, especially that last episode, it's framed in the center, so there's no real, like, dynamic or cinematic energy to the shots. It's all framed in the center so that people can clip the show and post it on social media. Which kind of speaks to the cynical nature of why the show is even being made to begin with. I understand that there is money to be made, that there is a natural, organic, built-in audience for this sort of thing. But at the same time, why don't we just watch the originals? Why don't we just load up the superior versions of the story? Why are we going to make these live-action adaptations when we could be making original material, even if it's risky? I feel like the ratings are going to be good because people are coming into it with morbid curiosity. I mean, I think I've seen some of the ratings. I think it's above One Piece, which I thought was actually a pretty decent live action adaptation myself, and that shocked me. I feel like when we adapt cartoons into live action, it comes from a place of insecurity. A lot of people, particularly adults who they themselves had been kids at one point, they tend to view animation as an inferior medium to storytelling, that we need to use live action people to tell stories so that they look legit. And I don't think that's necessarily true, especially with stuff that really, like this, the scope of it, the way that the bending looks, the reason why some of it looks like turn-based combat. It's too expensive to properly animate. But still, somehow these live-action adaptations, at least the movie ones, have been making billions of dollars or have been doing well on streaming. It's that chasing after numbers, and I guess people just want to have comfort food, and I get that. But media is supposed to challenge us. I feel like this live-action adaptation itself is just mid in the sense that it doesn't really do anything significantly different with the material because there is this loyalty to getting some of the moments right, like My Cabbages. But at the same time, there are creative choices and liberties made. There are missions. I don't believe Aang spent any of the time that I saw on screen, at least from what I remember, learning waterbending, and the book is about him learning how to waterbend. Additionally, some of the changes, like adding Azula into the mix this early and taking away the opportunity to have that episode in book 2 where she's recruiting her girl squad of Ty Lee and May, she already has them. It's just like, it's baffling to me because it's not necessarily the narrative integrity, but it's just some of these choices to set things up to ensure that there's a season 2 before season 2 happens rather than focus on making a good season 1. All of this is just faulty filmmaking and cynicism. I don't think there was real love put into the series beyond the cast. I think the way that it was constructed, it all feels like a cash grab, which is a shame because this property is something that people really care about. And you can tell me, oh, just don't watch it, don't pay attention to it, but it permeates in the culture. The success of this is just going to lead to other things being adapted, like Danny Phantom and Fairly Odd Parents and Jimmy Neutron of all things. And I don't know, I just find it so reductive. There was a time where making cartoons live action were just silly prompts for college humor videos, and now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's just very depressing to me as someone who does fancy the idea of filmmaking myself one day to see so much emphasis be on stories that have been told wonderfully the first time. Why don't we just remake bad movies? Why don't we just recycle ideas that didn't work the first time? Because Avatar, The Last Airbender worked the first time. Why are we redoing this? That's just some food for thought. Speaking of which, when it comes to TV, particularly movies, you can follow me on my Letterboxd account. It's my name, Eljohn. I somehow got the Eljohn handle on Letterboxd, which is pretty neat. I'm actually really active on there. Letterboxd is one of my favorite apps. I just love reading different people's reviews. I tend to write things about my personal life in my reviews. So if you want Eljohn lore, you gotta follow me on there. And I always follow back, trust me, I always do, because I just want to watch what you guys are watching. I want to see... Moviegoing should be an interactive experience. I don't think Letterboxd is killing movies. I think it's revitalizing the experience for people. Just don't get too lost in the sauce. Don't make it your personal identity. I have a few friends who literally I only know as Letterboxd people. But yeah, be sure to follow me on Letterboxd. I will follow back anyone who follows me back. It's Eljohn on Letterboxd. This is not an ad, by the way. They should be paying me. And this brings me to my last major topic. I want to talk about Madam Web. Madam Web is a movie that has been scientifically calculated to just tickle the lizard brains of every gay man and kind of crazy person on the internet who just wants something that's camp trash. Madam Web is a movie that honestly changed my life. I'm not even saying this comedically. I went to go see it with my two best friends in LA, and it broke their minds. They had to take multiple bathroom breaks just to tolerate the movie, but I was sat there the entire time, eyes open, hearts open. It is not a good movie. Anyone who walks into Madam Web expecting it to be a good movie, I think you guys are mistaken. It does not intend to be a good movie. Most comic book movies so far, like in recent times, I don't think I've seen a good comic book movie since maybe like 2018. It automatically is kind of trash. And the fact that Sony is behind it, and it's Sony's Marvel department behind wonderful movies such as Venom, Venom 2, the upcoming Kraven the Hunter movie, which honestly they need to reshoot it so that Aaron Taylor Johnson is just shirtless the whole movie, because that's the only way anyone's going to see it after this disaster that is Madam Web. This is a movie that is borderline camp. It is very close to being obscenely awful on purpose, but it still tries at given moments. I felt like Dakota Johnson herself, who plays the titular lead of Cassandra Webb, she gives such a camp performance. It's almost like scary movie line readings from Anna Faris. There's a self-awareness to how bad the script is. There are ridiculous lines. I will quote this line right here. At one point in the movie, she literally says to the camera, "I hope those spiders were worth it, Mom," in reference to her mom who died in the Amazon studying spiders in order to cure her daughter's neurovirus thing. Apparently, they explain why she goes to the rainforest. You know what? I'm just going to talk about the movie. So the movie starts with this really long flashback that kind of like reveals who the villain is. His name is Ezekiel Sims. Ezekiel Sims has to be one of the worst villains I've seen in a movie in general. Most of the movie, he is being dubbed over. This movie uses ADR. For those of you who are not movie nerds, ADR is automated dialogue replacement, which is this methodology where sometimes you don't get the line reading you need, so you record it in post and you inject it into the movie, and you use some movie magic to make it seem like the actor said it originally, but in most cases ADR looks pretty obvious. In this movie, Ezekiel Sims is in a mask, and using ADR on characters in a mask is a lot easier. Kylo Ren in the Star Wars sequels was notorious for having a mask on so that they could change plot points or change what he's saying. Anyway, that's beyond the point. Ezekiel Sims literally shoots a pregnant woman in the middle of the rainforest, and then she almost dies, and these spider people who come out of the blue, Las Arañas, that's what they're called. They're like a group of people who have been bitten by spiders and have clairvoyance and the ability to do Spider-Man things. Basically, like, they take her to this pond and they save her with a spider. And they don't save her, they save her baby Cassie, who somehow makes it from Peru to the United States and is now a foster kid who becomes a paramedic, played by Dakota Johnson, who is extremely bored throughout the entire movie. She gets powers one day, saves someone in a car, and nearly drowns to death. And then now she has to work and save these 3 girls from Ezekiel Sims because he has some weird vision of them killing him in the future. Anyway, like, she basically kidnaps them and takes them to the woods. Like, she literally leaves them in the middle of the woods. They go with her because Ezekiel's gonna kill them. Like, he goes through a bunch of cops and then he frames her for it. So she leaves these girls in the middle of the woods. The girls, like, walk to a diner and dance to Toxic by Britney Spears. Yes, that is the needle drop in the movie. They almost get killed, and then she travels to Peru to discover her roots and discovers her mom, like, tried to save her life, which, you know, was an emotional moment for me because it made me realize, like, my mom would probably do something as convoluted and stupid as that to save my life, which is really sweet. So anyway, like, her coworker is Uncle Ben, and Uncle Ben's sister, played by Emma Roberts. Yes, the Emma Roberts. Scream for Emma Roberts. Lana Del Rey fan Emma Roberts plays Spider-Man's mom. She tries to give birth, and then Ezekiel goes after the girls who are with her. And, like, the original plot of the movie was apparently that Ezekiel Sims was trying to kill Peter Parker in the past so that Spider-Man would never be born, which would have been a better idea than the 3 Spider-Girls and Madam Web were supposed to stop him. That's the movie that this should have been. It's very clear that they probably shot a version of this movie and they re-edited it into the final version that we got. Anyway, Ezekiel Sims follows the girls to and Madam Web, who saves their lives by crashing an ambulance into him. Yeah, we'll get into that. Never. They go to a pier where there's like fireworks going off for some reason, and then he gets killed because a giant P sign from a Pepsi sign. This entire movie was sponsored by Pepsi, by the way. It crushes him. Yeah, that's the movie. Oh, and also, like, a firework goes off in Cassie's face and she becomes blind and gets the full powers of being Madam Web and makes a joke about Kung Pao chicken. And, like, I don't know, that's the movie that we should have gotten, the one that happened at the end, but whatever. I wish the movie had been bonkers. Why am I talking about Madam Web in particular? I'm talking about it because it's symptomatic of issues within the industry in terms of, like, Sony needing to make a Spider-Man movie to keep their rights, you know, like, but also it being a camp masterpiece. I think that it is, like, a hilarious batshit movie that you should watch when it inevitably hits Netflix. I don't think you should go to a movie theater to watch it. It's roughly 2 hours. It's a bit too long. It doesn't make any sense. But everybody does look hot in it. I thought that Sydney Sweeney looked gorgeous as Julia Carpenter. Her costume, which only appeared for 5 minutes, was not even 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, was pretty screen accurate. Isabel Mercat, who plays Anya Corazon, I'm not sure if that's the character's name. She's also pretty okay in it. It's just such a dumb movie that broke my brain because it makes no sense. It's a movie that probably started off as something else, but then got chopped and edited into something bad. I think I'd argue that it's as bad shit as the J-Lo movie that I talked about on the last episode, but I just needed to vent about it because that movie did not feel real to me. When I was watching it in the theater, I myself felt like I didn't exist as a person. I just felt like I was, like, floating in space. I think that it is a camp classic, and anyone who watches it should win a Nobel Peace Prize in patience. I wish I was more organized, but, like, I'm just speaking stream of consciousness here. Like, Madam Web did not make any sense. I argue, though, that it is a more valuable piece of art than the Netflix Avatar show. And that just speaks to how mid Avatar is. I feel like art should either be extremely bad or extremely good. I think the worst thing that you can do is make something so mid that everybody just talks about how mid it is. Madam Web is so ingenuously bad. Like, it's so ingeniously awful that it has lingered in my mind. It is something that I will probably think about. Not forever, but like anytime I see Dakota Johnson, I will think of that. I'm actually going to see Dune Part 2 again. I had already seen Dune Part 2 at a press screening earlier in February. I adored it. You guys should go see it. If you want to see something good, go see Dune 2. Wonderful movie. See it in the biggest IMAX screen that you can see it in. Zendaya is brilliant. I feel like that is masterful filmmaking. A few closing notes on this rather scattered podcast. A huge congratulations to Beyonce with Texas Hold'em, which has officially gone #1 in the United States and is set for a second week at #1. I'm glad that the song has found traction. I honestly do believe it's like such a refreshing piece of music, and covering it last week as one of the inaugural topics really was great. In terms of upcoming videos, I am working on a Sweetener era recap, which I have had so much fun writing and am in the process of recording. And I just want to give a really quick shout out to my members and my subscribers. Thank you so much for sticking with my channel and watching my content. It means a lot to me when I am able to interact and chat with you guys about different topics, different artists across different genres. I want this channel to be a two-way street. I don't want it to be just me speaking into a microphone. I love interacting with you guys and figuring out what you want me to cover and creating a space to kind of like intellectually discuss pop culture topics. Whether or not you're listening to this doing your dishes, doing laundry, going on your commute, it means a lot for me to even use a second of your time. So again, thank you for that. And I guess I'll see you next episode on the MacCast. I will be more organized next time, I swear.